Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
Folks, it is time. Season 3, Episode 14, Exposé.
It is the big Nikki and Paolo reveal, Razzle frickin' dazzle, everybody.
We'll follow it up with the first part of a conversation with Ivan Askwith, who's a TV producer who has written about Lost.
Let's get into it.
So without further ado, we start every episode with hot takes. Exposé, hot take generator.
This episode is a giant hot take, is what it is, I think.
Well, thank you so much to those of you who shared some hot takes with us. We're going to play 3 of them now, and then one more as a hindsight later in the episode.
Hi, yes, I think Exposé is brilliant. It foreshadows a lot of things that are going to happen in the show. For instance, the good guy ends up really being the bad guy. Lots of twists and irony and razzle-dazzle, which is what a lot of Lost is all about, misdirection, smoke, and mirrors. The diamonds, what really happened to them? Did Sawyer really leave them buried with Nikki and Paolo? We'll see him holding a little black bag in his hand in Season 6. We'll see Miles sitting by Sawyer's tent holding a diamond. There is a lot more to this episode than meets the eye. Razzle-dazzle.
Hey guys, my name is Luisa. I'm from Brazil. I really wanted to leave a hot take for this episode because of Paolo, because he's played by Rodrigo Santoro, a very famous Brazilian actor. It was so fun to have a Brazilian on the show. But anyway, I read recently that he said he had an 18-episode contract for the show, and then since they couldn't really develop the character on those episodes, that they asked if he could stay longer for the series, and he said he couldn't. So they got to a point where they decided to kill him off. But I'm not sure if that's completely true, or if it had anything to do with the fact that the fans didn't really like Nikki and Paolo, or how they were brought into the story. But I just thought that was fun to share, and that it was super fun to have a Brazilian on the show, even though it was for a short time. And then people didn't really like him, but I did, and it was great. So I just wanted to tell you guys that. Okay, bye.
Hi, it's Barry Workman from the Maple Syrup Station here in northern Vermont. I love that you guys did this episode in a way to invite all of us to share our opinions, because I am on the side of this episode is more brilliant with hindsight and continued rewatch. And I'm going to give you 4 reasons why, because the numbers, and also because I know I'm hopeful there will be a lot of these. Number 1, very hateable characters. Just like Frogurt and Arzt, killing them off gave the audience a payoff. I loved that they died at the end, and in particular the twist where they really technically weren't dead was hilarious. Number 2, it advances the plot line. Sawyer and Charlie in particular have a great back and forth when they are investigating Nikki and Paolo's tent and putting their theories together, tying them to the others. Number 3, the plot right after that involving Sawyer, Charlie, Hurley's son, and whoever else was there, Kate or Claire, I don't remember, is a great bit of writing. And it shows how much thought they put into this episode. So when people say, oh, it was garbage or it was a throwaway episode, they had an opportunity to do something really fun, and they did it. And what they did with these characters in that scene is they put all of the mistrust in there. They bring up son's kidnapping, Charlie and Sawyer both staring at each other. Nobody trusts anybody, which is a great and brilliant tie-in to Nikki and Paolo's mistrust storyline. So number 4, obviously the episode is fun. They found creative ways to tie Nikki Paolo to the other characters and previous plot lines. The one I really remember particularly, and I'm sort of halfway through the episode now, involves when Paolo is looking for a place to hide the diamonds or whatever, and he's in the bathroom in that hatch. And Ben and Juliet come in and have that whole conversation about kidnapping. So I think my time's more than up. Thank you for doing this. Bye.
One thing I low-key love about Barry's hot take is where he mentions that he's recording this when he's only halfway through the episode, and I love to think that Barry was just so eager to record his thoughts about Expose because it is so good that he could not wait till he got to the end of the episode. He stopped halfway and gave us a call.
Just so full of thoughts. I do think, actually, that he's really insightful in the idea that this episode just makes you hate Nikki and Paolo so much right away.
It does.
Like the first or the second flashback is the one where they kill the rich TV producer, and you're like, oh shit, okay, they're working together. They just killed this man in cold blood, so okay, we know who we're dealing with here.
They are bad. It's like, hey, in case you guys were wondering, Nikki and Paolo, they're bad.
They really are.
I should note before we go on, from our listener Louisa, who mentioned that article about the actor Rodrigo Santoro and not wanting to stick around for more episodes. We did try to find that article. We couldn't find it. However, if it was published in another country and not in English, it's possible that we just wouldn't have turned it up in our searches. So curious if anyone else has seen that or has any information about Rodrigo Santoro and not wanting to stay on the show. If so, find us on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast, and send us a link.
Yeah, and what another great example of Lost really actively pursuing like a global cast and a global audience.
Oh, yeah.
It's so cool that Louisa's in Brazil and is watching along with us.
It is, and I mean, shame about Nikki and Paolo not working out, but... or not a shame, maybe.
Where do we stand on Razzle Dazzle as a catchphrase? Because working backwards here, one of the things I wrote down while watching this episode is like, what a stupid catchphrase.
I think that's the point.
I mean, yeah.
Actually, I think I have a thesis about this episode, actually.
Oh, dear.
So I was thinking, what is my hot take? Because you could hot take about everything. And I started putting stuff together about how, like, in the flashbacks that they just kept sort of, like, doing these things that were designed to, sort of, like, make fun of certain characters or shit on characters. Like, I don't know, there's...
like Shannon and Boone at the airport.
And the Kate Jack Sawyer love triangle where Shannon yells at Kate. Kate and her two boyfriends just found a case of guns that fell out of the sky. And the thing with Arst where Paolo asks, should we really be trusting a high school science teacher? And Nikki's like, well, junior high, actually, but yes. And it just, I don't know, a lot of it and also Paolo, when they see the Cessna, Nikki tells them to climb up. He's like,
looks like it's been here a while.
Go up there. Maybe there's a radio or something.
Are you insane? If I go up there, that thing's gonna fall.
You're not gonna fall.
What? You want him to die?
Yes, it will. Yes,
seems
it will.
Like a very, blatant, like, ha, that Boone and Locke didn't think of that.
Right.
But I don't know, what I started to realize is that I just think this whole episode is basically just a way of trolling the fans for, like, 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. Just, like, from start to finish. Because, I mean, the whole structure of the episode is, it starts by telling you Nikki and Paolo are dead. And then the twist at the end is, just kidding, they weren't really dead.
But now they are.
Well, now they are, but it made me think of, like, the whole thing with people complaining that they thought that everyone was just dead the whole time. And of course they're not. I mean, this is maybe a stretch, but this episode structure is making you think that two characters were dead the whole time when they were really not dead the whole time. I don't know. The more I thought about it, the more I thought this episode is just like everything about it is just trolling you from, like, start to finish.
Wow. That's a galaxy brain take.
Yeah. It's expose. What kind of take do you want, Rosie?
I mean, I agree that they're trolling in that they're, making you feel like, oh, of course I should have thought about the 30 other people on this island and not just the 10 who we know well. And
that too.
Holy shit, Nikki and Paolo found out about all this stuff. I mean, they found the hatch, they found the Cessna, and they didn't tell anybody. Like, they've just been leading this, like, parallel quest that has, like, nothing to do with the quest of our heroes.
They overheard Ben talking about kidnapping Jack and Kate and Sawyer.
Yeah,
or Paula
Jesus. God, and they heard Ben say, like, blatantly, oh, well, I'll just, figure out what he loves and then use that to my advantage. Like, just laying out his whole strategy.
Yeah. Yep.
And they just didn't like that very much feels like a troll, but I had not considered an inside joke around whether or not they're dead the whole time.
It's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but once I started
like it.
getting into this whole, the episode is just here to troll you theory, that sort of seemed to
Right.
come naturally.
Right.
I don't know, man. Everything
Oh,
is so
dear.
good.
Is that your hot take, or?
Yeah, let's call that my hot take. So what's yours?
I mean, my hot take is that, I mean, holy shit, like, Sawyer and Hurley kill Nikki and Paolo. I mean, by accident, but they do bury them alive. And Nikki's eyes fly open at the very last second as sort of the first shovelful of dirt covers her. And, I mean, holy, that's dark. That's real dark.
It is. I have to admit, I went back and rewatched that 3 times. It's so disturbing, but it's magnetic.
Yeah, and it's almost on the line of so ridiculous it's funny,
But that's the point.
which is the point.
Which
Yeah.
is the point.
And yeah, you don't even feel conflicted. I mean, I did initially because I was like, "Fuck!" Our Hurley helped kill these people. That's awful. And then I was like, "Well, that's not how I'm supposed to be feeling right now. That's not what I'm supposed to walk away from this
So
with."
one thing I was thinking about is that the episode, I mean, like Barry said and like you're saying, it does set it up very clearly so that it's hey, we don't want you to feel bad for Nikki and Paolo.
Right. These people suck.
They suck to each other, they suck to everyone else, they deserve to die. And yet the episode still kind of makes the occasional gesture oh, don't forget, they are human beings.
Right,
when
Paolo
Hurley does
almost-
the eulogy.
Paolo almost comes back at the end when he's about to become paralyzed and he says, well, I only did it because I was afraid you would leave me. And, it's a humanizing moment. And then he is no longer able to speak and Nikki steals the diamonds from him anyway.
Right.
But,
It's a humanizing moment if you believe him when he says that.
yeah. And one of the many twists at the end, it's revealed that, what Nikki was saying when she turned up on the beach was paralyzed, and they interpreted it as Paolo lies, but why can't both be true?
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I was just thinking as well of when Hurley does the eulogy and he's struggling to think of something nice to say about them, and all he can really come up with is something along the lines of, there were good parts to you too. There must have been. And
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I just
Because I think the first thing he says is you killed each other over diamonds, which is absurd on its face, but also true.
I mean, to me, this is part of my galaxy brain thing, where I think that even the parts of the episode where they're kind of hinting that maybe you should remember that they're humans and being sympathetic to them,
Right.
is just further trolling of us because they know that we're not going to give a shit about them and they just want to make us feel a little bit bad as we laugh at how they die.
Right.
I don't actually think we're supposed to feel any sympathy, but I think it's there because they want you to feel a little bit dirty about it.
That makes sense. Yeah, so one thing I found funny in the flashback, when they're in the airport and we see that really, really obnoxious conversation between Boone and Shannon about their seats in first class, and
Promise me we'll never end up like them.
I promise.
and I was just like, you conned and killed a rich man and stole his diamonds and fled to Los Angeles. So, what makes you think you're not already like them or significantly worse?
The way you said, you conned and killed a rich man and stole his diamonds.
That's what they did.
It's just such a ridiculous statement. It doesn't sound like that could possibly describe an episode of a serious TV show.
Well, and this, is arguably not a serious episode, or, not one that really serves to... Not serious, quote-unquote, in the sense that it doesn't, contain 10 essential plot points.
Right. It does not contain multitudes.
No.
Did
I
you
mean, it
know-
does. It really does, but...
It's true. I'm sorry. I take it back. Did you know? Wait, tell me if you know this. Did you know that originally the idea for Nikki and Paolo was that they were going to do a whole flashback episode that took place within the world of the TV show Expose before revealing at the end that it was just a TV show?
I did. I did read that. Can you imagine if the whole flashback had been like the strip club with the cobra? And that would have been so jarring. Way more jarring than flashbacks in foreign languages. Way more so than Mr. Clux getting hit by a meteor. Like, oh my God. If all of a sudden, and the show is treating it seriously, like, oh, now we're meeting like an exotic dancer and like her mob club, like,
right.
That might have felt like jumping the shark if they didn't let us in on the joke soon enough.
I agree, actually. I mean, I kind of think that this whole storyline with Nikki and Paolo that they've unspooled here over one episode instead of over like a season or two, I kind of think it only works because they did it in such a ridiculous way over the course of one episode. Like, I actually think that if they had drawn this out and sort of, like you were saying, treated it seriously rather than as a giant troll, then it would have been lame.
Yeah, because I think what helps it work is that you realize very quickly that you're being trolled and then you can get in on it.
Yes.
You know, it's like when you're being made fun of and you can either laugh with the person or fight it. The sooner you give in, the more fun you have.
Right, because it's like the meta-narrative of this episode is, hey guys, we know you hated Nikki and Paolo, so we're going to dispose of them in the most ludicrous way possible.
Right, and just make you hate them even more.
Yeah.
Along the way.
And it works so well.
God. How did you feel? Do you remember how you felt about Expose the first time Lost was airing?
I don't, actually. I don't remember reacting that strongly one way or another, which is a little weird. Do you?
I know that I have never watched this episode again. So the couple of times I've gone back to watch the series, I've just skipped it and said, like, okay, Nikki and Paolo, like, nah, I don't need to see that again. And it, you know, I didn't realize it was having this renaissance in the fandom until this year being the 15th year of the pilot. A bunch of publications put out their best episodes of Lost lists, and I think it was the Hollywood Reporter that put Expose, and it included the sentence, if you have not allowed the brilliance of the gang buries Nikki and Paolo alive into your heart, I do not know what to say.
Oh my God.
And I was like, and it was like, you know, maybe a month or two ago, and we knew Expose was coming, and we were just like,
The gang buries Nikki and Paolo alive.
Which they do.
Should we title that the title of this week's episode on our podcast release instead of Expose? I guess probably
possibly.
not.
And I'll also differ from our long agreed upon format.
Yes.
As sort of a meta commentary.
I mean, what is this episode if not meta?
Oh, jeez.
Boy.
Oh, man. So, I do want to, like, come back to this point of, like, Nikki and Paolo discovered all of the island's secrets. Many of the island's secrets. Yeah. On this parallel track, and just told nobody?
Yes, that's accurate.
I know that, you know, nothing in this episode is believable, and that's the point, but, like, how do you find this big-ass hatch in the jungle? And how do you, like, overhear a planned kidnapping from the others? Even if you're not in on, you know, Henry Gale being kept down in the hatch and all of the other secrets, like, you tell... And I get that they're preoccupied with their search for the diamonds, and they don't want to, you know, get too close to anybody because they... whatever. But,
I mean,
like,
I think it's just because they're such big assholes. They don't care about anyone else.
I guess.
Someone else is going to get kidnapped? No skin off my back.
Right. Right. No wonder everybody thinks they're working for the others.
Which is a hilariously terrible theory, but yes, no wonder.
But, I mean, I
guess
see
you
it.
never know.
I love the episodes that get a gang together of people who are not like Jack and Locke and Kate.
Yeah, you're right. Jack wasn't... I don't think Jack did anything in present time in this episode, or Kate.
No, neither did Kate. But when they just link up Sawyer and Hurley and Charlie and, in this case, Sun, and they just have to solve a mystery on their own, it's refreshing. The Dharma
Yeah, it was
van.
really satisfying. And we actually got that last hot take that we haven't played is about the Jin... the Sun, Charlie, and Sawyer storyline. Should we play that?
Yeah, I think we've led right to it.
All right.
Hi, Rosie and Sammy. This is Susie Hula, and I'm calling with my hot take or hindsight for expose that is actually not Nikki and Paolo related. While I am decidedly in the pro-expose camp, my favorite part of the episode is actually the moment when Sun confronts Sawyer after learning that he and Charlie planned the fake kidnapping. What really gets me about this scene is when Sawyer asks her, "Have you told Jin?" To me, this is indicative of how important Sawyer's friendship with Jin is and shows how much Sawyer has grown as a character. When you think about it, the two of them have already gone through so much. The raft, the pit, the journeys with the tailies across the island. But Sawyer asking this question also foreshadows the importance of the relationship they are going to have for the rest of the series. Following the departure of the Oceanic Six, Jin and Sawyer are going to travel through time and then spend 3 years together in the Dharma Initiative, where we see them clearly having a very close friendship. The Jin-Sawyer friendship doesn't get a lot of airtime in the show, but I think it is a really important one, and this moment of vulnerability from Sawyer illuminates the amazing character arc that Sawyer undergoes.
I love this take. And she's so right. Like, I hadn't thought about that dimension of that confrontation between Sawyer and Sun, because Sun kind of quips back like, no, I haven't told Jin, because then there'd be another dead body. And I was so enamored with that quip that I didn't really think about
same.
the depth here. But Susie's totally right in that Sawyer and Jin are going to go on to have a years-long friendship. Although those years are kind of scattered throughout time.
Friendship nonetheless.
Yeah.
No,
it's beautiful.
It's very sweet, and it's a dimension of Sawyer that we don't usually see. I mean, it's a vulnerable moment to him where he's worried that he's messed up, a relationship.
Yeah.
And
which
we don't get that.
We have maybe never seen him care about before. Like all of the
we've seen him
times
care
when
about
he's...
like Kate, arguably, but
ish. But I feel like the times when he worries that he's messed up his relationship with Kate, he just kind of goes and sulks.
Right.
And says like, well, whatever.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
Do you have
some maturity?
So in line with that being sort of a hindsight, do you have a hindsight?
I mean, we have learned so much about Ben and Juliet in the first half of this season that the reveal when Paolo's hiding in the bathroom doesn't really seem shocking, but it is still a little bit shocking, and it's especially kind of funny to hear Ben spell out plain as day what he's planning to do.
No, I can convince him to do it.
How?
Same way I get anybody to do anything. I find out what he's emotionally invested in, and I exploit it.
And in case anyone had any doubt that Ben got captured on purpose, like...
Yep. Ben
Yep.
had him locked.
Devious motherfucker. My brief hindsight here was that when... I appreciated when Hurley found the expose script and got really excited about it. And it reminded me of in season 5 when he's trying to rewrite or pre-write the Star Wars script.
That's right.
Because he thinks he can do it better. And, Hurley's a fan of TV. Fan of good TV, good movies.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, Billy D. Williams was in this episode.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, he was in Star Wars.
Okay.
He was Lando Calrissian, and he just kind of shows up here for a hot minute.
Was he the Cobra?
He was the Cobra, yeah. Playing himself, by the way. She calls him Billy D. He's an actor in the show.
Oh, you're right.
She says, "Good working with you, Billy D." Just in terms of treating Nikki and Paolo as a punchline and being rude to them while they die, I just loved that right after Nikki dies, the last line from Sawyer is,
"How's Nikki?"
So rude, but so good.
Oh, and a classic Sawyer line, and it's possible. I mean, we see them interact, I guess, a little bit in the on-island flashbacks, but they don't, like, hang out. Not that Sawyer hangs out with anybody.
I think he has no idea who the hell she is.
Yeah.
Or at least what her name is.
Doesn't she try to get a gun from him?
Yeah, that happens, but I still think he doesn't know what her name is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm sure he has some nickname for
her. Oh, yeah. Did you catch Vincent pulling the blanket off of Nikki and Paolo while they lay?
Did.
Because he clearly knows they're still alive.
Oh, I didn't make that. I thought it was just Vincent, like, being a dog. Is that a thing?
Oh, my read was that Vincent, like, knows they're alive and is trying to tell people.
Oh, no. Oh,
if that's
dear.
not canon, that should be canon. Oh, actually, one more, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
I really enjoyed... This is a little bit more of a serious one, I guess. I really enjoyed when Locke says to Paolo...
Things don't stay buried on this island.
And then there's, like, a beat, and then...
The beach is eroding. Winter's coming, high tide. Whatever it is you're hiding, make sure you pick a spot that won't wash away.
So it's like, this metaphor line that then, like, is literal but also works as a metaphor. And the thing it reminded me of very strongly, which took me a few minutes to remember, was Desmond in the stadium with Jack saying, "You've got to lift it up." Mm-hmm. And then that kind of pause. Your ankle. You've got to keep it elevated. Mm-hmm. Kind of a similar little trick with the dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like Locke has done that to us a couple of other times, and I just can't recall what they are. But that kind of make a broad statement that, boy, it seems applicable to what our character is sort of dealing with internally, and then, oh no, it's very pedestrian.
Except that it's Locke, so he kind of meant it in the mystical way too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. With all of that said, we are going to slow it down, relax a little bit, let somebody else talk. That person is Ivan Askwith. Sammy, can you set this up for us?
Yeah, so Ivan's a pretty interesting guy. He was a student at MIT where he was studying things having to do with TV and relationships with fans and how TV shows were taking advantage of, like, new media of communication through the internet. Ended up working for a digital marketing agency that worked with a bunch of TV shows. Then he went to work for Lucasfilm. He worked on the Veronica Mars film and ran their super successful Kickstarter campaign. But we're talking to him because he has written quite a bit about Lost back in his quote-unquote fan whisperer days, as he explains. He'll explain what that means. But he wrote a pretty interesting essay on how fans interacted with Lost and sort of like what the expectations that we had as fans, how that affected how we viewed the show. So it's kind of a meta conversation, but he's got like a super distinct perspective on what Lost did well.
It's interesting that we're doing this today since Expose is so out of the realm of what fans were used to when dealing with the show, and that's what was so jarring about it. But anyway, we can talk about that after.
And that, I think, is a good sort of launching off point to get into this essay you wrote in, I think it would have been probably 2007 or 2008, titled, "Do You Even Know Where This Is Going? Lost's Viewers and Narrative Premeditation." Yeah. And to me, the most interesting things about this essay are sort of getting at what you were just saying, talking about what is the relationship between the creators of Lost and the fans. How does the expectation of one group affect how what the other group does? Do you think before we delve in too deep, you could just sort of explain for our listeners, who probably most of whom haven't read this essay before hearing our conversation, sure, just what question you were trying to answer here and why you wrote this paper?
Yeah, of course. It's funny. This was sort of a standalone area of interest for me, separate from everything else I was looking at about Lost. I was mostly looking at Lost as kind of a commercial, industrial, and fan oriented production. But as a fan of Lost, I became really interested in a question that I saw over and over and over again anytime that I was on any Lost message board, the Fuselage, or anywhere that people were discussing the show, Television Without Pity. And it seemed to me that the most common question, which I found really fascinating, was, do the showrunners actually know where they're going with this? Do all of the clues that they're putting on the show actually mean anything, or is it all the illusion of meaning something and later it'll turn out that they were making it all up as they went along? And as a fan, in theory, I cared about the answer to that question, and I know that everyone I talked to and obsessed over the show with cared about it as well. But as, I guess, someone who was also trying to think about it academically or as a case study, I found it just as interesting why I cared about the answer to that question so much, right? Like, a lot of shows you can watch and enjoy, and it doesn't really matter if the writers have mapped out in advance exactly where they're going, if they know what the end game is going to be. You can watch it and just enjoy it for what it is. And with Lost, more so than maybe any other show, Twin Peaks maybe a close second from about 10 years before Lost, but Lost seemed uniquely to beg this question of, do they know where they're going? And if they don't, does that mean the show is kind of a lie? Is it a joke? Is it a waste of our time? And I was really curious, given how much I enjoyed Lost, how much I enjoyed spending time talking with people about Lost back then. I was curious why the answer to that question seemed like it mattered so much. So what I was trying to do in the chapter that you're referring to was not answer the question of did they know where the show was going, because that's always going to be kind of a he said, she said when you talk to writers and people who are involved with the show. I was trying to answer the question, why do we care so much whether they know where they're going, and how does that change our experience of the show and whether the show is good, both, at the time when I was writing it, I think we were just approaching the end of season 3. And now, 10, 12 years later, does the eventual answer, our conclusion about that question, change how we think about the show now? So that was what I was trying to look at.
Yeah, so talk about what you found. I mean, what was it about Lost, to your mind, that was unique, that inspired people to ask that question, that they weren't obsessing about this on, other TV shows or fictional narratives? What made Lost different?
For sure. So I think a number of things made Lost different, both things about the show and things about the moment in time at which the show happened, right? If you start with when the show was happening, a couple interesting things happened around the same time as Lost. If you remember, Lost was actually not only a huge seller on DVD, where people could kind of binge the season before binging became maybe the most common form of consuming serialized television shows, but it was also one of the first shows in the deal that Apple made with ABC. So it was one of the first TV shows you could buy from the iTunes store.
Right, I remember doing that to catch up, actually, because I didn't start until the middle of season 2.
Exactly, right? And previously, if you had wanted to catch up, you'd have to basically wait till a given season was over and then get the whole season at once, and then you could binge it on disc. But with iTunes, you could catch yourself up at any point mid-season right up to basically the most recent episode that it aired, which was both necessary and, I think, pretty impactful, right? Like the show that maybe had the most in common with Lost in a lot of ways before it Lost was Twin Peaks, because it was this show predicated around a huge central mystery, and it encouraged the audience to look at everything that happened on the show like it was a clue and to speculate on which clues were important and which ones weren't. But I don't think Twin Peaks managed, it was a cultural phenomenon, but I don't think Twin Peaks ever pulled the kind of numbers that made it one of the most important shows on the network it was on. If it had, it certainly would have gone on longer than 2 seasons. Whereas Lost, along with, I think at the time, Desperate Housewives and Grey's Anatomy, they were kind of like the vanguard shows on ABC. And I think part of what had happened is that with things like iTunes becoming possible for catching yourself up on a show, serialized shows like Lost had a chance to take off in a way that they had never been able to before. You could get a much bigger audience because they now had the chance to catch themselves up whenever they wanted. The rule on television up until around when Lost came out was always, don't make shows where episode 3 requires me to have seen episode 2 and episode 1, because it's going to mean is that I have fewer and fewer people watching every episode, and I need more and more people watching every episode. And so you didn't get shows with the kind of plot complexity and detail orientation that Lost had. And I think in some ways Lost could only become the success that it became at a moment when DVD watching was becoming incredibly common, and then shortly after that, the ability to a la carte get episodes right after they had come out became common, because you no longer had to depend on a rerun cycle. You could catch yourself up literally at any point. So for the first time, a show that was heavily serialized could gain a bigger and bigger audience from episode to episode rather than getting smaller. And so one of the things that happened with Lost was that it was hugely dependent on details, and the way it was structured, especially because of the flashbacks, was, as I think Jason Mattel's been on your podcast as well, yeah. And as he talked about, he had this notion of forensic fandom, where Lost was a show that encouraged you to watch it, but not just to watch it, to actually dissect it and be analyzing it and speculating about it in real time, and trying to figure out what secrets it was keeping from you and see if you could get to where it was going before it actually did that itself.
Yeah, the thing you said in your essay that struck me on that was this idea of the serial contract, that sort of Lost was promising you everything happens for a reason, so if you pay close attention and, pick out all of the clues carefully, you should be able to predict what's coming and figure it out. I just thought it was interesting that idea that the show is encouraging that, not just watching it happen.
Totally, and that's the mode that Lost really, I think, took off in, right? I mean, obviously, not everyone who watched Lost went online afterwards to debate about every episode, but most of them did talk to anyone else they knew who watched the show, and everybody kind of had a pet theory about it. To the point where I think the way I started that chapter in the book was noting that when Matthew Fox was hosting SNL in the middle of the run of the show, it was inevitable that they were going to do a sketch about Lost, obviously, because that was the thing he was best known for at that point. But the sketch about Lost didn't involve him in character, and it didn't involve the other actors on the show playing characters from Lost and doing something that parodied Lost. It was a sketch about him in an elevator with a ton of fans trapping him in close quarters and asking him questions and then telling him that they had theories about the show, that they didn't really think the show knew where it was going, that nothing actually seemed to be happening on the show, and he kept saying, no, I promise, our writers know what they're doing, we're definitely going somewhere. And I thought it was fascinating, that right up to the level of a cultural conversation like SNL, one of the biggest things people were discussing about Lost was whether it knew where it was going or not. And I think that's because there is a contract. And when you ask people to watch a show and every flashback seems to give you clues about why what's happening might be happening, you're basically training people to act like detectives, right? And unlike a lot of shows, I think about this a lot in relation to, say, Breaking Bad, which became a huge hit in the years after Lost, and I think about it in relation to Game of Thrones, which obviously has most recently been that kind of cultural phenomenon. And on both of those shows, you could watch them, and even though they were serialized, they weren't really promising you anything they couldn't deliver. They weren't saying, later you're going to find out what this end game was the whole time, and you're going to realize that we've been planting all these clues, and it's all going to add up, and it's all going to mean something. In fact, the writers of Breaking Bad openly said in interviews all the way through the run of that show, we don't know where we're going to go with this. We have a broad arc. We kind of know where we want to end. We don't know how we're going to get there, and in fact, what we try to do every season is write ourselves into the craziest corner we can come up with so that we have to find a way to write ourselves out of it. And yet nobody who watched Breaking Bad said, this is garbage, I'm not going to watch this show, they clearly don't know where they're going. And I think the reason for that is because Lost wasn't just telling you, we don't know where we're going to end up. It was telling you all these clues that we've been seeing, everything we're encouraging you to go online and talk about, everything we've shown you in the flashbacks, all of these books that we reference, all of these philosophers who we're naming characters after, who you're spending time reading about because it might give you some idea what's happening on the show. If they didn't know what the point of the show was in the first place, like if they didn't have answers to the questions they were giving clues for, how could the clues mean anything, right? So it feels like a betrayal of trust, that they're asking you to spend all this time speculating, and that can only be meaningful if they know what it is they're asking you to try and figure out. But if they're going to make it up later, it's sort of a violation of the same contract. When you read a detective novel, it's incredibly unsatisfying to think that the writer put clues all the way through the book, but then didn't decide until they finished writing the book who the murderer was, because then it's kind of like playing a card game and finding out that the rules were changed on you and your hand wasn't actually, Right. That's the wrong metaphor. But you get what I'm saying. It's kind of, you set up terms and you say, the relationship that I have to you as a showrunner is, I'm putting a bunch of clues in place, and if you're clever, you can probably figure out, or maybe you can figure out before everyone else what they mean. But for that to be a fair deal, those clues have to be based on me knowing what they're going to mean. And not
right,
just...
and you say in your essay, you think Lost was, you call it the most novelistic show ever to air on U.S. broadcast television, and when you say it like that, the whole thing about the enjoyment being predicated on how's it going to end, it makes a lot of sense. There's a different contract that you have when picking up a book generally than you do when turning on the TV.
Totally. And it's funny because they talked about, and I looked a lot at that time, at Charles Dickens, who was kind of a famous novelist. And what a lot of people who only know Dickens casually don't realize is that most of his novels were actually written as serialized content for newspapers, where he would write a new installment of the story every week or every month, and it would come out piecemeal. And so people would be, just like Lost, people would be reading the first chapters of his story before he had even written the third chapter of his story. And so he had to kind of not necessarily make it up as he went along, but he was accused of that, just like the writers of Lost, and what eventually turned into a novel. It's funny, because if you look back at the novels now, you'll notice these really interesting tics. Like when a chapter of a Dickens novel starts, it will often restate briefly the exact thing that you just read about 2 pages earlier. And that's because it wasn't meant to be read seconds after the previous one. It was meant to be read weeks after. It was kind of the equivalent of Lost having, previously on Lost at the beginning of every episode. He had to do that in the action at the beginning of every chapter. So I think Lost, it had a lot in common with long-form fiction and narratives, and it was, I think it was posing more questions that had to be paid off than any show that had come on television at that point. Even Twin Peaks, which introduced a bunch of questions, was still mostly predicated around one question, right? It was, who killed Laura Palmer? And in fact, they ran into trouble when they had solved that question, and they realized people weren't super interested in the answers to a lot of the other questions they tried to replace it with. But with Lost, there was no one central question. There was nothing but an unending list of questions and open plot threads and things that you hoped they'd pay off. And it's, one other thing that I think I mentioned in that chapter that's maybe worth kind of bringing up here is there's a famous theory in drama, or a principle called Chekhov's gun, which is the idea that Chekhov once said, if you make a point of saying in Act 1 of a play that there's a rifle hanging over a fireplace, then in Act 2 or 3, someone better fire that rifle, because if they didn't, you've wasted time and space, and you've put something there that just distracts someone from the story rather than setting up the story. And I think Lost ran into that exact problem, where they introduced all of these clues, and in the end, I think they hoped they would be able to pay off a significant number of them, but they didn't introduce the clues already knowing what they planned to do with a lot of them. I think it's funny 10 years later to look at the show and know how it ended. I mean, honestly, before we talked today, I had to go back and reread on Wikipedia and Lostpedia the recaps of all of the later seasons, just to try and untangle what happened, because there is no intuitive thread where you're like, oh yeah, everything made perfect sense, and you could really see a through line. Things kept getting crazier and crazier as they went on with the show.
So I had never really heard before the comparison of Charles Dickens to serialized television. But I think it's a really interesting one and a really apt one.
No, it's interesting. I didn't know that his novels were, or that novels in general were serialized in that way. That was news to me.
Yeah.
One thing that I, thought was just this kind of tension between, the whole thing about this ethos of Lost, everything happens for a reason, and that was, the idea that this was a promise that was made that maybe couldn't be kept.
Right.
I just think it's such an interesting tension, because Lost also wouldn't have been great without that.
Without the sense that everything has this gravity and you need to pay attention to everything.
Right, and because that was what that drove so much of the fandom and my own fandom, and the the trying to answer questions. It's it's almost like not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but maybe a double-edged sword. I feel like I'm still not quite hitting the right metaphor, but it's it wouldn't have been great without it, but it also, there was no way to do it without then disappointing some people.
Right, and Ivan here describes it as a betrayal, the fans expecting that, okay, if you're planting all of these things and you're telling us that each one is a clue, the polar bear maybe being the most famous example, we expect that means that you are the puppet master and you're pulling all the strings, and all of this sort of connects to this grand framework. And if that's not true, well, then what does that mean for my experience? And
it means your life is meaningless. Ha 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 ha.
Oh dear.
Yes. I've said this before. The only one, unanswered question that still pisses me off is the canoe.
Oh.
Because that was, and I was thinking about it, because, the rest of it, fine, Ivan is right. They did what they had to do to make a great TV show, and it's fine. Right. I loved it. But the fucking canoe, it was late in the game. It was the 5th season, and it was very dramatic and very specific and very detailed. And it's like, why the hell are you going to do a scene like that at that point in the show in that way unless you know exactly what's going on and have a very good plan to explain it? And I know they've said that they meant to and that they know the answer and that they're sorry they didn't get to it. But come on,
Have they ever said what the answer was?
No, they refuse. Damon, Carlton, come on.
Amazing.
If we can ever get Damon back on the show, I'm going to ask him that. We'll be back next week with Left Behind, Kate episode. Probably won't have quite as much fun as we did this week, but we will have more from Ivan Askwith, and the conversation continues to be a source of great fascination.
Thank you so much to the folks who sent us hot takes about Expose. That was so much fun. It was great to hear your voices and your thoughts. You can send us a hot take anytime, and we would be delighted to discuss it on the show. It can be about the episode that's coming up. It could be about that one unanswered question that still pisses you off, as the canoe does for Sammy. Whatever you want. You can reach us at 9546-DHARMA.
We also take voice messages via Facebook Messenger. Again, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast. On Twitter as well, at The Hatch Podcast.
If you are so inclined, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen. Our cover art is by Danny Roth.
We will talk to you next week.
Namaste.